Hey everybody, welcome. In this lesson, I'm going to be sharing with you an invaluable lesson I learned from a Holocaust survivor that has dramatically improved my mental health and the mental health of all of the hundreds of clients we've supported over the years. My name is Hicks. If you're new to our community, welcome. I'm the founder of mentalhealthcoaching.com. We put this material out there because very often therapy, medications, traditional coping mechanisms are useful. They're just not usually sufficient to help people get the mental health that they want. And we want you to have the insights and skills you need to really have great, sustainable mental health. So the gentleman that I'm referring to is Victor Frankl. He was an Austrian psychiatrist, a Jew. And during the 40s, he ended up being taken to a concentration camp. He survived the end of the war and got out of the concentration camp. He went on later to use some of the insights that he gained from his experience in the concentration camp to refine his psychotherapy practices. And he created what is referred to as logotherapy. And so the big insight of Victor Frankl, which, by the way, if you've never read the book Man's Search for Meaning, I highly recommend it because he authored that book and detailed some of his incredible findings. And so what we are able to glean from his experience that he shared is that when he got to the camp, essentially what happened was he noticed very quickly that there were two predominant psychologies of prisoners at the camp. And so what he noticed is that some of the prisoners would sort of die very quickly, within a matter of days or weeks very often. And so meanwhile, there was a different segment of prisoners that seemed to be more resilient. They had maybe been there several months or even a couple of years, right? They were seeming to be a little bit more hardy. They were adapting to the circumstances a little bit better. And he was really fascinated by this, and so he started to interview the prisoners to try to get a sense of what was going on. And what he realized was that the biggest difference between the prisoners was not necessarily their age or their background or any of that type of factor. What it really was the meaning that the prisoner was giving their circumstances. So for the prisoners that seemed to essentially sort of give up, they weren't feeding themselves, they would not really prioritize getting sleep, they would not take care of themselves, they would allow themselves a little bit more easily to get whipped and punished by the guards, things of that nature. They all had similar meanings about the situation. They would say things like, why is God punishing me? Or my life is over, or we are in hell, right? All of these just very, very understandable, right, but very dramatic, negative meanings that they were giving the situation. Meanwhile, the other group, they weren't, the more positive group, the more resilient group was not necessarily, it's not like they were delusional, right? They weren't, thinking that they were in Disneyland or anything crazy like that. They just simply had a different set of meanings that they were giving their situation. So they would say things to themselves very often like, I have to get out of here. I have to reach my daughter. I have to reach my family. Or sometimes it was even just like spiteful, right? Like I'm gonna make the Nazis pay, right? I'm gonna make these people pay, something of that nature. But what he noticed is that the more resilient prisoners had something that they would latch onto that would give their existence in the camp meaning, right? They had a different meaning that they were given their existence, and therefore they had more to live for. Because they had more to live for and they were holding on to that particular meaning, they would do things differently in the camp. They would really prioritize eating whatever food they could possibly get their hands on. They would try their best to keep themselves hydrated, to try to sleep. They would huddle together at night. They would, adapt to the different political relationships inside of the camp, right? But they made it a higher priority to survive. They would band together a little bit more so. And so anyway, the great big insight that Frankl got out of this experience is that the thing that truly makes the difference in the quality of human beings' lives is not necessarily their background or their circumstances or their privileges. All of those things play a role for sure. But what he realized made the biggest difference of all was the meaning that the human beings chose to give their circumstances. The meaning that they gave their circumstances was the biggest factor that determined what their emotional relationship to their experiences was. And so in my experience working with people dealing with anxiety, depression, all of these things, this is exactly what I've found to be the case. That sure, if you grew up in a abusive, neglectful environment, is that going to have an impact on you? Yes. However, what is going to really have the biggest impact is the meaning that you give the neglectful, abusive environment that you grew up in, right? And so I've spoken about this in other different things, but I've had the experience of working with people who come from almost identical tragedies and situations: sexual abuse, physical abuse, poverty, neglect. One woman I worked with was kidnapped for a week, right? And so the transformation that always takes place from being totally wrapped up in emotional pain to eventually experiencing mental and emotional mastery is what we call it. Not mental and emotional perfection, right? But mental and emotional mastery is that what happens is you have to change the meaning that you are giving your situation and your circumstances. So if we develop a narrative or a story about our past, that our past limits us now in the present and in the future, then that's exactly what's going to be the case. It sounds so cliche, but it's so absolutely true. Things become cliche only because they're totally true, so people say them 100,000 times and then they become cliche. Right? But what we believe is true is what becomes true. And what we believe is really just a byproduct of what we tell ourselves on a repetitive basis. So what I'm trying to impart to you here is that the lion's share of your mental health is not determined by your genetics. It's not determined by your background. It's not determined by the current present circumstances you find yourself in or the problems that need to be solved in your life right now, although I'm sure there are plenty. The big determining factor that determines your quality of life on a regular basis are the habitual meanings that you give your circumstances. Right? If you believe you can't, you're right. If you believe you can, you're right. If you believe that you are limited and imprisoned and trapped and you have no options, and that's what you tell yourself, that's what you're going to feel. You're going to always act in accordance with what you believe, and so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So in order to create a better life, we must first reclaim our amazing ability and power to change the meaning that we give to our life, to our circumstances, to our past, to our future. So this is a call on you to be present to the dominant story or narrative that you've been saying in your head continuously, which, by the way, sometimes the stories we tell ourselves are 100% true, but they are still disempowering. So it may be true that your stepfather or your mother or your older brother abused you, molested you, hit you, neglected you, didn't feed you, right? Those things may very well be true. I've had my own troubles in the past, right? So some worse than others and some more privileged and better than others, right? But that's beside the point. The point simply being we have all faced unfairness in our life. We have all faced people taking advantage of us. We have all faced people treating us harshly or rudely or harming us or hurting us in some way. But what creates the difference is the meaning that we give it. And that is something that you are totally in control over. All you simply have to do is build a new habit of what you tell yourself. And I'm not saying be delusional. I'm not saying tell yourself something completely not grounded in reality. Right? I'm just simply saying that it is no longer benefiting you to recycle a story that disempowers you. If you do that, then you have now become your own abuser. You have replaced the person who maybe abused you in the past, and now you are keeping that abuse alive and well in your nervous system on a daily basis by recycling the meaning. If they told you you were worthless back then, and now you're the one telling yourself that you're worthless now, who's really abusing whom? Right? So that's something you really want to be careful of. So I'd love to see your comments. What are the meanings that you have been giving things? So what have you been telling yourself is a simpler way to answer that question, right? What have you been telling yourself? What are the top 2 or 3 things you've been telling yourself on a regular basis when you feel emotional pain as of late? And what could be alternative meanings that you could use that could make you feel more empowered, more able to choose your destiny, more able to actually move things forward. That's what I would like you to know. I would like you to be able to figure that out, right? Because if you can master the process of choosing what you make things mean, you can become a mental and emotional master, and you can do it a little bit more easily if you get some help, but even learning how to do it on your own is an invaluable life skill that we all need to learn. So hope this is valuable to you. Go ahead and check out the next episode we have waiting for you, where we expand on an additional skill so that way you can keep the momentum rolling, and we'll be excited to see you in the next one. Bye.